Mm.
Thanks for joining the session. We may have people come in and out. If you have questions, please put them through. We'll either answer them today or save it to the end, whatever makes the most sense. Just to give you a little bit about myself, I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for Sea Change Media, which is actually the parent company of Poets and Quants. We actually have 5 properties in the higher ed space that include Executive MBA, our main Poets and Quants site, which is our flagship. We have an undergraduate business site as well that some of you may be familiar with, where we focus on students that might be interested in getting being a business major in undergraduate school. A law school site, as well as a social entrepreneur site. But for today's purposes, we're going to be looking at reporting that comes out of Poets and Quants, the main site. Myself, I've been in higher ed for, going on 20 years. About a little bit more than half of that was at the Princeton Review for a while. Not on the test prep side of the business, but on the higher ed side of their business, which I believe still is a smaller part of what they do. Prior to higher ed and the Princeton Review, I spent some time in print publishing at Ziff Davis and IDG for a lot of years. I live in North Carolina. I'm a dad of 3, and I'm patiently waiting to be able to travel internationally again and do a bit more of that, which is a really fun hobby for my wife and I. So that's just in a nutshell a little bit about me. And it occurs to me that it may be worth taking a quick look at who Poets and Quants is, what we are, what we do, and where we came from, and what does that crazy name of ours mean. So we are in our 11th year. Poets and Quants was founded in 2010 by John Byrne, who, if you're not aware of who John is, he's the former editor-in-chief of Business Week magazine, and the executive editor of Fast Company, along with a whole other host of credentials. One of his most dubious honors is being the guy who actually created the first MBA rankings, business school rankings for Business Week back in the day. And it's the thing that is both equally painful and useful for business schools and students alike. But around that 11, 12 years ago time, when Business Week started to de-emphasize their coverage of the graduate business school market, John saw an opportunity to create Poets and Quants, which is what we do. And he created it with this funny name, Poets and Quants, that I know when I first came on board early on, which was when he launched, was a question that I used to get a lot. Well, what is Poets and Quants? And, even having gone to business school myself, I wasn't familiar with it, but traditionally you have candidates that come from one of 2 areas of education. They're either from a quantitative background, engineering, mathematics, finance, that sort of thing, and get referred to as quants as they go to school. And the other half come from a liberal arts background, and all that entails, and get referred to as poets. And so we thought kind of or I should say John thought a kind of a nod to that sort of inside vernacular of MBA students that we'd call the site Poets and Quants. And we talk about that often. I mean, it's especially as we're looking at test prep, the GRE versus the GMAT, you'll find that some of the people that come from a poet background might lean themselves towards one test over the other. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And just to give you a sense of who we are and what we do, we are an in-depth resource for students that are really interested in getting an MBA from a top-tier program. And all of our content is primary sourced. It's written and covered by real journalists that are on-staff journalists that write as many as 20 to 40 articles a week. We don't aggregate any content. It's not predominantly sponsored content. We do have sponsored content, which is part of our revenue model, but the 99% of our content is originally sourced by our writers and includes things like interviews with deans, comparing two different schools to each other, and analyzing all the rankings that are out there, the US News rankings, the Economist, the FT. We have our own rankings. We do a composite MBA rankings every year, which is not a primary ranking, but it's a composite of the 4 big MBA rankings that we do. We do have our own primary ranking for online MBA programs. We cover things like specialized masters, executive MBA, executive education, test prep, of course, careers, admissions consultants, pretty much anything around from the top of the funnel of the application process to business school, all the way through graduation, through matriculation to graduation and beyond. Anything business school related, we cover. And we cover fairly aggressively in a way that no other entity out there does. So using that as a little bit of context of who we are, I wanted to dig a little deeper into the GMAT and GRE, which is what we're here to talk about today. I'll preface this by saying that the data and the information that we've pulled from here comes almost exclusively from our reporting that we do on the site. You know, there's some surveys, studies that we do that report on third parties like US News data or Economist data, or surveys that have been run by admissions consultants. But this is all a factor of the reporting that we do on our site. So as I'm sure we're all aware, the 2 primary entrance exams for business school are the GRE and the GMAT. We have started to see in recent years a rising interest in the executive assessment exam, which is also owned by GMAT. But for today's purposes, we're not really going to dig too deep into that. The size of that is fairly small. And I think it's a little bit more interesting to see where GMAT and GRE are today as opposed to where they were in the past 5 years. So generally speaking, and I'm making gross generalizations here, the GMAT as a test tends to be a little bit more quantitative, a little bit more, you know, students reported it's a little bit more difficult in the math sections, while the GRE is a little more forgiving with the quantitative side, but far more challenging on the verbal section. So looking again at that poet and quants thing from a 30,000 feet look, you know, a GRE might be more of a better fit for someone with a poet background, while a GMAT may be a great fit for someone who has a finance or investment banking background. But some of that also depends on the kinds of careers that they're looking for post-graduation, which we'll talk a little bit about. You know, some of the other things, the GRE does allow people to skip questions, come back to them later. The GMAT doesn't allow that. It's largely a sort of academic psychological thing. The tests, the amount of time allowed for each one of these tests is very limited. So the ability to actually go back and go back to questions can be somewhat irrelevant depending on how quickly you're going through the test. But psychologically, it does help in taking a GRE to know in your mind that, hey, I could come back to this and move on and, you know, focus and not get caught up staring at a single question for an extended period of time. On the downside, the GRE or ETS doesn't really offer a whole ton of prep materials, official prep materials for the GRE, which can make it a little bit more difficult to prep. Where GMAT does make prep materials fairly readily available for the GMAT, and some of that has to do with the sheer volume of time that the GMAT's been in this space as an entrance exam for business school. From an application standpoint, most schools, even at the top tier elite side of the pool, do accept GMAT and GRE. The admissions directors tell us that whether a student submits a GRE or a GMAT, they view them equally. Students have reported that that's been their experience as well. So from an application standpoint, it's less of an issue which test you take. There is some consideration about employment post graduation. In certain fields, employers do look at your GMAT scores in particularly. So if you're looking at certain categories of work, the GMAT may make more sense for you. So the choice of is it a GRE or a GMAT is a bit more complicated than whether I'm a poet or a quant. But we'll see a little bit more of that here, and there's no right or wrong answer to that. A lot of it has to do with the candidate and the student. So in looking at the sort of growing battle between GRE and GMAT, what we're looking at is, as we know, historically the GMAT has been the test for MBA admissions for forever. GRE entering this in the past several years has seen a lot of growth in the number of submissions of students taking the GRE instead of the GMAT. So it's been a really positive growth area, especially in the past 5-6 years for GRE, as they kind of build market share beyond what they currently were doing for GRE, which is specifically in the MBA space. The pandemic last year, as it impacted everybody's business tremendously, obviously had a fairly large impact on the test prep business, and pushing both of those offerings online came with some ups and downs that we'll talk about as we get further out. But that's definitely intensified the debate or the competition, I should say, between the two exams as they both went online and started to compete on that platform as well. And we talked a little bit about why the GRE might be more attractive to an applicant without a quantitative background, while the GMAT may be more attractive to somebody with a quantitative background. Again, those aren't hard and fast rules, but we do kind of see people gravitating towards the test that they feel that they're going to perform better on. So one of the reasons you're seeing, so we'll take a look at some of the reasons why you're seeing a rise in GRE beyond just the marketing of it. The GRE does have sort of the versatility too. So as you're looking at graduate school and potentially looking at a variety of different categories of graduate school to go to beyond just a business school, the GRE offers some versatility. Because you can use the GRE as an entrance exam for other graduate programs and even law school, which is a fairly new thing, which obviously the GMAT does not have. It's a strictly entrance exam for business school. From our reporting, we're seeing, and this is based on reporting that we did earlier this year, 35 of the top 52 schools, meaning business schools, have shown an increase in GRE submissions in the past 5 years. So one little asterisk there, that's 35 of the top 52 schools. Only 35 of those schools actually reported data to us, so the number might actually be quite higher. But it does kind of give you a bellwether of how much traction the GRE has been getting in the marketplace. In the past year alone, from 2019 to 2020, 16 of the Poets and Quants top 25 ranked MBA programs have seen an increase in new admits who have submitted GRE scores instead of GMAT scores. Same deal with the data there. This is based on the number of schools that actually reported. We suspect that number to be a little bit higher. We are also seeing 8 of the top 26 schools saw double-digit increases as percentages in GRE submissions. And we can even take a look at the top, here we are, yes, the top three. So these are, over the last 5 years, the increase in the number of submissions, applications that are submitted with a GRE score instead of a GMAT. And leading the pack as of right now is the Washington University of St. Louis Olin School of Business, the University of Pittsburgh, which I apparently spelled with a Z, with the probably to match the Cat School of Business at 36%, and the Georgetown McDonough School at 32%, which are really significant percentages of growth in GRE takers over GMAT. Overall, looking at the average number of GRE submits, again, looking at the top 25 schools based on our Poets and Quants ranking, in 2019, the number of GRE submits were about 13.5%. In 2020, they were double, 28.8, 27.8%, rounding 30% there. So, we're seeing some significant growth in that, especially at the top tier. So, it may sound as if this is all doom and gloom for the GMAT, and GRE's eating their market share and all of that. But the reality of it is that when you look at the numbers overall, that's simply not the case. I mean, GRE is an institutional testing brand that's been around for a really long time. And while GRE is growing, the GMAT still doubles the number of submissions even at top schools. So even looking at the M7 schools, Stanford, Booth, Harvard, all showing GMAT submissions over 75%. Kellogg showing a whopping 85% in GMAT submissions, and this is all in the last admission cycle. So we don't need to feel too bad for GMAT. They're doing quite well. We're even in a student poll that we published recently on the site. It shows that 4 out of 5 applicants prefer the GMAT exam over the GRE. And I think as we talk about why that might be, and anecdotally from the students that we've interviewed and spoken to, there's a not untrue perception that if you're looking at a career in consulting, finance, investment banking, those traditional employers will look for a GMAT score as part of their hiring process. And so those students may feel that a GMAT exam will look better overall in their resume beyond applying to business school, but even after that. So, that some of that is changing, which we'll talk a little bit about, but it does affect how students perceive the tests. A lot of the students will say that they think that regardless of what the schools say, that the GMAT test is going to be more favored. We don't think that that's necessarily true, but that does appear to be the impression, at least for some students. So I wanted to take a second and take a look at what effect the pandemic had. It was a bit of a inflection point for both of these tests in these organizations. So on the Poets and Quants side, as we were scrambling in the early part of May, April of last year to take our significant event business, which was an in-person thing, and bring it online. So were countless other organizations trying to figure out how to deliver their products in an online basis. So what we saw is the GMAT launching an online version of their test, and as one of the things that we know that part of the sort of business school market or any graduate school market, but particularly the business school market, is During any sort of economic downturn, you can see an increase of applications to graduate school, particularly business schools, as students that were thinking of going to business school would, apply to kind of hide out for 2 years while the economy was recovering. So when they were ready to graduate, hopefully the economy had turned and they could get a new job and walk out with an MBA from a great program. In anticipation of that sort of application burst, which did happen in the fall of last year, GMAT and GRE wanted to make sure that students were able to take their exams, so they could maintain those applications, and so they did introduce an online version of the exam that, when it was originally launched, was fairly glitchy. It got a lot of students frustrated with the test. There were proctors that weren't properly trained. They had a whiteboard tool that was extremely difficult to use. However, those glitches have since been addressed, and what was originally launched as a temporary option to get us through the pandemic has been made permanent in January of this year by GMAT. So the GMAT is now a total option for taking the test that wasn't, which makes the accessibility of the test exponentially greater, and available 24/7, with the exception of the few countries that won't allow it due to internet privacy issues. Similarly, not to be undone, the GMAT and the GRE also launched an online version of their exam in March of 2020. They had human proctors watching via video. You can take the test every 21 days, I think up to 4 times. And ETS, while also had originally planned for this to be a temporary thing to get us through the pandemic, has also made the online version of the GRE a permanent option, allowing them to compete head-to-head with GMAT as a testing option. Again, a couple of countries that they're not able to deliver the online version in due to internet privacy issues. So, there are things, factors, sort of downstream factors that will and can affect the growth of both of these exams. And I wanted to take a look at what's happening in the employer space. So, I mentioned earlier that traditionally in consulting, finance, banking type post-MBA jobs, those companies will look at a GMAT score as part of the hiring process. Some of that is starting to change. So firms that we recently reported on, what we call the MBB, the McKinsey, Bain, BCG, the top 3 consulting firms, have talked about de-emphasizing the GMAT as a hiring tool, not eliminating it, but de-emphasizing it. To sort of paraphrase one of the senior recruiters at Bain, he suggested that, if I have a candidate that has tried out or is competing for the Olympics, that tells me a lot more about their competitiveness, their work ethic, and the type of person that they are than a GMAT test does. And I think it has to do with this notion of looking at somebody more holistically, rather than just the results of a single test. And it doesn't mean to suggest that it's going away by any stretch, but to hear those 3 prominent market makers speak like that is telling. It may mean that the GMAT and GRE will take a different role down the line, but in the near term, probably not a whole lot will change. But as they sort of de-emphasize that, it's something to be aware of. We're hearing similar trends from some of the top, more elite MBA programs. Schools like Michigan Ross and UVA Darden have also talked a lot about de-emphasizing test scores, but more than that, offering test waivers for a certain amount or a certain kind of work experience. During the pandemic, a lot of schools, most of the top 25 schools offered test optional applications for MBA students, which allowed students to actually not even have to worry about taking a GMAT, but apply without a test, without a test score. And a lot of schools have extended that for the time being. Now, whether that ends up being something that continues way post-pandemic in the following application cycle, we'll have to see. But there's enough of those schools that are offering that and extending those things that it's worthy of note. And it doesn't necessarily indicate a trend, but it could be. So the potential long-term impact for the GRE and GMAT could be affected by those sort of external factors in how those tests are being used, and once the student takes them. So we wanted to look a little bit about tutoring and test prep. Excuse me. So again, this is data that's based on our reporting. And for anyone that's interested, this refers to a specific piece of reporting that we did a few months back. And there's a whole ton more data in there to look at, to dig deeper into. I'm going to try to qualify some of this data so that we know exactly what we're talking about here. But there is more to be had if anybody's interested in taking a look at this. But what we're looking at here is comparing people who took a test prep class versus a tutor. And we're largely talking about the large companies, the Manhattan Preps, the Princeton Review, Magoosh, Veritas, these kinds of companies that offer tutoring services as well as test prep classes or combinations of those. So students who took a class in any format, and as you know, much like the SAT and ACT prep, the formats are varied. There's live in person, there's live online, there's online and in person, there's asynchronous, asynchronous on demand. So any combination of these are considered a class for the purposes of this. So these people saw an increase in score on the GMAT of 93.7 points. And so we're talking exclusively about the GMAT right now. Students who used a tutor increased their score by 90.2 points. And then those who used a class and a tutor were able to increase by 100 points. It's fairly significant. And I know this next bullet kind of sounds like a big duh. Of course, the amount of time is going to have an effect on the score. But the way it breaks out, the reason it's broken out this way, it has to do with really how these companies sell their packages. So, if you're looking at 20 hours, 30 hours, 40 hours of prep time, this is the potential impact it can have on your test. From 76 growth of 76 points to 93, and again, these are averages. Depending on how long you're prepping. Not an exact science. You could obviously prep on your own, but I believe this data really kind of takes a look at packages that you're buying from a test prep company. And again, this is just a really top line look at the top 3 test prep companies based on the average score increase. Again, this is based on classes. Manhattan Prep comes up at the top with an average increase of 104 points, followed by Veritas and Kaplan at 74 points. This data is sliced and diced 15 different ways, and it is available on our site, and I'm happy to share the link to the article where that is when we're done here as well. for you to take a closer look at that. But to the extent that this is interesting, these are the ones that came up at top. And Manhattan Prep is the most expensive one, and it is worth mentioning that there may be a little bit of skew in that data, in that our audience tends to be, we tend to write to and attract the top of the market, meaning the students that are really looking at a top 25, top 50 MBA program. And so, you have a certain type of very aggressive student that comes to the site and wants to spend hours pouring through data and reading through articles about the kinds of programs that they're interested in. But they're also more willing to spend money on test prep, tutors, admissions counselors, the whole nine. And when you look at Manhattan Prep with that, Manhattan Prep is probably the most expensive test prep organization out there. Classes $2,000-$3,000. We'll look at this next slide. You'll see their rough hourly rate for tutoring, for private tutoring, still some of the highest. So the data can be skewed by sort of our audience when we survey the audience in that way. And this, for your purposes, just to get you an idea. And obviously, these numbers are coming from the large companies that offer tutoring services. I'd like to note that some of these hourly rates I backed into a little bit based on what they're charging for a specific package. And they're based on the largest package that each one of these offer, which gets you the lowest hourly tutoring rate. So they're not exact figures, but it kind of gives you a ballpark of what some of these companies charge for tutoring. And it does go up significantly from here. I think Manhattan Prep might even top out if you're just getting tutoring at over $300 an hour. So some of the takeaways that I had as I kind of wrap up, and of course happy to answer any questions, is we're seeing a massive rise in people taking the GRE as a alternative to the GMAT, or in a lot of cases in addition to the GMAT, to try to pick which test is going to make them look better. The offering of flexible formats, the online version that's lasting far beyond the pandemic, is a positive thing for the GRE and GMAT. I mean, I think it gives them runway to grow, to make it more accessible, for people that are comfortable in doing it in an online environment where you can sit in your office or your living room at home and take the test there. Test optional and test waiver policies at the top MBA programs could have a lasting impact on the testing market. The jury's still out on how long some of those things will last for schools that have introduced those as answers to restrictions from the pandemic. But it's something to keep an eye on. All that said, the testing still plays a vital role in MBA admissions and careers. Any sort of shift away from testing does not mean to suggest that testing is going away. I think both schools and MBA recruiters are really interested in the most diverse class that they can admit or hire. And that means taking a look at a wide range of experience, a wide range of backgrounds, and it may make the GMAT or GRE kind of something that gets you into play, but some of these other things really making a difference in admissions and getting hired. And test prep, as I'm sure most of you know, is an extremely competitive area. The GRE GMAT prep, it can be lucrative. I think there's an opportunity, particularly at the top of the market, for for individuals or organizations that can demonstrate significant increase in test scores for students that are really willing to pay to move that 150 points in order to get into a really top tier M7 or top 25 MBA program. So that is the analysis in a nutshell. If there's any questions, I'm happy to